Welcome to an episode of Connecting Conversations. I'm so excited to be here again today. It's been a while, has it not, that we've been with you and just me and talking about all things to do with connecting conversations, Evelkah. I'm excited about the topics we're going to be doing over this year. And this is obviously one of many in some big, I think, topics of series that we want to explore over this year. And I think it would be good to hear from you in terms of like, how did you envision kind of just like what today's topic is going to be about? Today's topic is going to be about transitions. When you hear that word, what does it make you think about from the outset?
Oh, I think transition is such a big word, and it's so complex, multifaceted, because I think every day we are transitioning into something or someone or life in general. So for me, when I think and hear the word transition, I almost think of the fact that I'm ever evolving and what's next and what do I need to do now to help me get to that next level. So in a visual sense, transition for me is like walking up a mountain. Every
Yeah.
step that I take to get to a goal, to get to where I want to be, to get to the person I envision myself. And as you're trekking up a mountain, there are different, journeys and pathways, obstacles, and sometimes you may slip back down, but then there is another convenient thing that you can do to overcome. And transition is a way of building up your resilience, your strength, your confidence. So I know a lot of people are scared of change, which is, quite commonly connected to the word
Yeah,
transition.
for sure.
But for me, I embrace change because change allows you to build yourself, allows you to um, kind of look at life in a different way, gives you a different perspective on things and life in general. So I actually like really love the word transition, and I think it's such a beautiful thing that we can evolve, and we can kind of create something out of nothing, really. So for me, that's what I think about transition. I know it's a long-winded way, but yeah.
No, it's good. I'm going to pick out so many bits of what you've said there, and I think there's so much value that you've kind of even presented in just what that means for you. I think that one of the first things that kind of stuck out to me is that you said that I like transition. It is really uncommon, I think, that people would actually say that, but I think your perspective is something that is really helpful and inspiring to adopt because I think as creatures of habit, humanity is renowned for not always enjoying change as a general thing. And then you have these oddballs who I find are either the trailblazers, the ones that shift, break ceilings, because they were not afraid to lean into things that are changing, things that are evolving. And really that's where a lot of we find the gold and the success lies, is because we're trying things that are new, or we're leaning into a process of difficulty or evolvement in ourselves. And because it's not recognizable to something before, if we could lean into recognizing that it doesn't have to be scary and actually good things on the other side of it, it can make that process so much easier. And I think that might be the crux of where I think for me personally, I struggle with it. And I know commonly others might feel similar to that.
Yeah.
I think when I think about transition, it's like we can go as far back as going from one year group to another in school, going between being a student to being in employment, going from, being a child to an adult, going from being someone who's just shifting in their finding of their authenticity in themselves. There is so much that the breadth is so wide. And if we were to stop and say, nobody escapes transition, nobody really, avoids that process. And yet we could make, right, exactly. So like, leaning into it in the way that you've described, I think surely if we could just grasp that gold nugget of a truth, we won't have to feel the way that we might do when it feels like this could be hard. We could lean into it and have the perspective like, this is good. I'm changing. I'm growing. I'm evolving. But not an easy thing to navigate, as you know.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. And I think the transitions I've had, even moving to, for instance, from the Caribbean to the UK, for me, that was one of the biggest transitions because not
Wow.
only it was, learning a new way of life, but it was also embedding myself in a new culture and understanding the secrets of that culture, or the unknown rules of that culture,
Yeah.
which is so difficult to navigate. And then on top of that, it's just like, okay, back home we don't have public transport per se, and having to navigate how to even, go from A to B and learning a
Right,
whole new
right.
system. It's like opening your eyes to a world that you never thought existed before. And
Hmm.
transitions, no matter how small or big they are, it's literally the way I see it as well. It's literally the tiny movements that we make each
Hmm.
and every day. When we get up in the morning to go to work, that's a transition in and of itself. When we're ending the workday to, I don't know, go to the gym or meet friends, we
Mm,
transition ourselves to accommodate those environments. So
yeah.
I think, people think of transition as this big thing, scary, don't want to engage with it, but we are doing it every single day in our daily lives. But it then makes me come back to, what transitions are most significant as to who we are, makes us.
Mm.
So I guess that's my question to you. Like, if you look back on your lifetime, is there like a key transitioning moment that you believe made Carla, made the Carla today?
I know that's such a great question, and I think honestly, if I'm to think to kind of, if you were to put them figuratively on the wall in front of you, like almost
Yeah.
like a movie reel, like which point would that be? And I think there's too many to answer for that actually, because what became as a result, or what was defined as a result of that transition, is quite unique to the other times, but still really big
Yeah.
elements to framing the evolvement of who I became and who I'm becoming.
Hmm.
I would say probably the biggest transition for me was probably like yourself, actually coming over as an immigrant child from a culture that was kind of in a bubble, which is interesting because I've spoken about my background before, coming from South Africa.
Yeah.
And as an adult, it's had very different nuances and connotations. As
Yeah.
I'm in an era where I have more knowledge about its history. I have
Mm.
more knowledge about, there are so many other dynamics politically, racially, and all of what that means for an individual coming from that, either diaspora or someone that has roots there. But when I think about it, the transition about Carla personally is actually when I left as a child. So none of these other big political big words that we're using now, or big topics that we're talking about now, was what was kind of at play when this transition took place for me. So the why this was such a big deal was because I left as a child at 9 years old. Now, 9 years old then is quite different to 9 years old. I was still playing with Barbies at 12. Our generations now have got mobile phones, way more overly, I think, mature. Their concepts of the world are a lot less innocent, if I can say that in some shape or form, just because of the overexposure of media, and what was like, appropriate for children then, to keep them children, is so different to what is seen as appropriate now. But also, like, the school system that I came from. So you start school at 7 years old there. You start school here in the UK at 5.
Oh,
And it's
wow.
so interesting they asked that question. This might get quite transparent, and hopefully this will help someone. So I'm not afraid to talk about it. But as a result of coming at that time, I'd always felt, and joining in schools here, joining into the school system here and the culture here, I was already, when they say that you're formulated the person, they say when you get to the age of 7 years old, that's the person. So I came at 9. That was the person. I had kind of had some layers and establishments of what I thought was cultural norms, but it was in kind of a bubble because it was created for me.
Yeah.
And when I came to the UK, I went to this little faith-based school that had, like, really, like, small amount of students, but really high academically. And everybody who I knew came from this mentality of, like, healthy village. Everyone is looking after everyone's kids. It's really hopeful. It's full of dreams. Everyone is taking care of everybody. And nobody swore. Like, swearing was something I never encountered at school, and stuff. It's just the families that we associate. It was the community that we associated with. The first thing I heard in primary school was the words effing hell from the mouth of, like, a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old. And these were younger kids than me in the playground. And I was just like, oh, this is so different, so different. And then not only that, because I just explained that there is a different time when you start school in South Africa to when children start school here, I've always felt that I was at the back foot, running to catch up, because I felt like I was always 2 years behind.
Yeah.
And that transition was so hard. But I had so many questions, but, like, I'm a child. I don't really have control over what's happening right now. The fact to come here, I felt incredibly unwelcome. We moved to an area that was predominantly, white middle class. And even though I come from a mixed race family, I never saw color like that. I just felt I belonged because I identify with people that come from that community because half of them look like my family. But
Yeah.
feeling like the wallflower, not quite the same as everybody else, but not just that, but culturally, my perspectives of respect for teachers and stuff was very different to the way that I could see my classmates hang out. Like there's a big kind of culture of that where I came from, originally from South Africa. And then that never quite caught up with me until I left university at 21 years old. So that's a good, 12-year gap of always feeling that as a result of that transition from moving from one country, one major culture, one whole load of values into a whole new system, a new set of values, and new cultural norms, never quite left me. And I've always felt like I'm not quite clever enough, not quite arrived enough. I'm having to work harder than everyone else just to get simple concepts to make me worthy. And
Yeah.
that has probably been the biggest, when I could think about my life at large, that was really defining until I just got to a place after I left uni, things just started to settle, which is interesting. But I won't lie, that really defined just the feeling like, why do I feel like I'm always a step behind, or it will just catch up for me later on. I'm a little bit behind everybody else. And actually, you carry that with you. You don't, it's not even, I can't even say that's actually true, because if you were to keep me outside of thinking about all of those layers of things, you'd actually find that I was really at the progress that I should be, along with my peers, and still had my uniqueness and still had my things that made me shine.
Yeah.
But it's not visible to yourself. You don't have that self-perception. And a lot of the time that imposter syndrome would be that kicking in, always feeling I had to prove that I had things to say. And if I had things, I had to be right. And if it's not right, then you've got to do all the work behind closed doors to make it right. And that always cost me more. It was extra uphill to get just a little bit of what I thought would be a way to kind of find an equilibrium to stand shoulder to shoulder with what felt like my contemporaries at the time. Very long-winded, but you asked me, and kind of exposing, but like, I do wonder if others ever feel that way. But that was probably one of the biggest transitions for me. I'll ask you the same question. Where, like, a transition moment through your life that has been so defining for you?
I think outside of, and I've talked about moving to the UK quite a lot because
Mm.
in and of itself, that was one of the key defining and moments for me. But I think over the years and now living in the UK for, gosh, over 11 years now, I think one of the biggest transitions, and this kind of connects with one of our other topics, which I won't go into too much detail about, but it was definitely ending my relationship with my ex.
Wow.
We were together for just over 7 years, and I think the Evelkah in that relationship is not the Evelkah you're looking at today. And it wasn't until I decided that that relationship was not conducive to the journey and the path that I wanted to uptake. I I definitely felt a sense of renewal, um,
Wow.
a shift in who I am mentally, physically, emotionally. Like I sometimes look at pictures of me when I was in that relationship, and even down to the pictures, I look so different, and I find it so hard to recognize myself. And I'm not saying that that relationship was toxic or anything like that. It wasn't. Um, he was an amazing person, and I'm never gonna, say that he wasn't. But I think it was more of the fact that, to an extent, I wasn't becoming my full self and being true to myself.
Mm.
And it was, it was, I guess it was a point of me wanting to accommodate for them and wanting to be there for them, that I almost forgot to be there for myself. So I
Yeah.
lost myself throughout that relationship, if I'm very honest. And it wasn't until I said no to it that I've had a huge transitioning moment. My circle changed. I started to be a lot more vocal. I started to show up more. I started to engage more in my faith more. I started, saying no to things that I probably would have said yes to previously. I did my first solo trip, and finally went back home after so many years. And again, that's not to say that that person held me back from doing so. It was just that there were so many challenges and barriers that it was never the right time. So I think that ending that relationship was probably one of the biggest transition internally
Mm.
um, for myself that I went through. And as much as, you know, at times I think about whether I could have still hold on to that and be the person I am today, I now am confident to be like, no, this was the person I needed to become, and there was a reason that relationship had to end in order for me to transition into the Evelkah people are now witnessing and engaging
Mhm.
with.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I would say is one of my defining moments, because yeah, I was a very different person,
I think
even down to like.
it's so good to hear you talk about that, and I also just appreciate just how respectful you were, because sometimes people think like, if I'm in a certain context, whether it's relationship wise or geographically where we were, it really does impact what comes out of who we are. And it's not putting the onus always on the environment or the person that's there, but it's understanding like, where were my seasons at? What choices were I making with that within that environment, that did that really free me to the way that maybe it could have done? And I think those are
Yeah.
really important questions to kind of pose when we're reflecting on like, okay, I'm moving from one stage to another. Like, what was the part that I
Mm,
played? What was the part that I think the environment played? And just have good grace for that element, because nobody escapes. It's all part of growing, isn't it? And I really, really
yeah.
enjoy like how you have like, it's reflective, but knowing the parts that you were also empowered through all of that moment. And you can look at what you gleaned in value of learning about yourself, whether things were there
Mm,
or whether things weren't there. You can recognize it now and see how that's contributed to the whole journey. I guess my question
yeah.
would be, if you were to encourage somebody else about transition, maybe if you were to give that younger version of yourself some advice, and what would it be? Actually, what would it be? Or someone
Um,
that you see that kind of is like going through this similar kind of like, you're at that place of questioning what to do next, what would you advise them?
I would, and to be honest, I had this conversation with an individual, someone that I consider to be a part of my kitchen table, as Michelle Obama would say. um, but I think just to go back a little and give some context and background, I think the one thing that I would mention before I answer that question a bit more specific is the fact that transition, even culturally, looks very different.
Yeah.
Um, and I found that even people who are from a different racial or a different community, for instance, being part of the disabled community, their transition into life or into certain things looks very different. So I'm very aware that transition will look differently for everyone, and
Mhm.
we all have our own um, kind of our own journeys that we have to trek. But coming back to the question, I would say to young Black queens who are figuring this out, life can be quite daunting for someone that looks like me, especially in the corporate world, and voicing how you feel and voicing who you are and trying to, I guess, be a part of the, the the environment that you're in and trying to fit in and adapt. It can be quite challenging,
Mm.
but I would definitely tell that person, or even my younger self, is just to sit in it for a while. I think it's important to acknowledge the transition you're about to embark on.
Right.
And instead of running away from it, instead of hiding away,
Mm-hmm.
not acknowledging it, I think you need to face the beast sometimes, because there's so much that you can do and so much that you can learn in facing that transition moment, and you don't know what's on the other side. So, in doing so, I encourage everyone to be bold, to have to have courage, to have faith that things will turn out, and it might not look exactly what you want it to do or be. I certainly didn't know that I would be the person I am today. I didn't know some of the challenges, some of the success that I
Mhm.
would have had, but I would certainly say is to be still, acknowledge, be present in that moment, and then face it head on. And you'll be surprised of the strength and the resilience you then conjure up to face what may seem seemingly like scary or big.
Mm.
It's actually not in reality.
I
So
love
that's
that.
okay.
I love that. I think that's a perfect place to kind of end this
Yeah,
conversation, is like, lean into it, give
yeah.
yourself a chance to be still in it.
Anything else you would add to that?
This is a good question. Like, I think, what would I have said if it was to my younger self? It's probably really similar things. But I think what I would add to that is just like, have grace for yourself. Because a lot of the time, I think when we don't know, or certainly if you're the personality type that I was or am, sometimes there's an expectation. I don't know why. You feel like you should be better, you should know more. But the truth of it, if you were to peel off everybody's honesty layer just for a day, you'll see that nobody really knows. They are just figuring it out too. And like, I struggle to have grace with that too. That doesn't mean I sit back and don't do my part. It doesn't mean that I sit back and don't engage with it proactively, which I think you've beautifully articulated. But what it does mean is just like, sit back in terms of where, like, have grace for the fact that you are allowed the space and the opportunity to figure it out,
Yeah,
absorb it, see, why am I responding to this transition in a certain kind of way, get that sense of self-awareness going. It's going to help you long term.
yeah.
And I think that's what I would add to that. But I think that's hopefully some really helpful tips for whoever comes across this conversation.
Certainly, and no matter what transition you're faced with at this moment in time, just be bold. Just
Yeah.
acknowledge what's happening, recognize it, be present, and also to add to what we were both saying is don't be afraid to bring someone along to support or
Yeah. So
someone
good.
who can help you because I think even in my transitionary moments, um, I had people who can help me along the way. And I think if it wasn't for some of those key people in my life pushing me or being
Yeah.
there when I needed them, because sometimes the transition isn't comfortable. It's very uncomfortable. And there are times when you need a shoulder to cry on. Or maybe
Yeah.
quite
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah. Find your people, honestly.
Use people around you. Use your kitchen table. That's literally my motto this year
Mm,
too.
mm.
Use those at my kitchen table to help me. Um, go to the next level. So thank you all for listening. And we hope some of the other conversations around how people transition through careers or motherhood, even
Yeah.
schooling, whatever it may be, we hope these conversations inspire, motivate, and encourage you that no transition is too big or too small that you can face. So take care and we'll see you in the next podcast.
See you in the next podcast.